Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Wendell, and this is Lead Well MD, a podcast that explores how leaders can transform healthcare through emotionally intelligent, effective clinician leadership. In this episode, we sit down with Dr. Holly Beeman, a seasoned healthcare executive and former OBGYN, known for her transformational leadership across complex health systems. Dr. Beeman shares how she made the shift from fixer to facilitator, leading not with control, but with curiosity and connection. Drawing from her clinical and executive experience, she offers us practical insights for leaders who want to build trust, foster engagement, and let go of the need to have all the answers. So, if you've ever struggled to stop solving and start empowering, this episode is for you. So today I'm really happy to have Dr. Holly Beeman with me. Dr. Beeman is someone I've known and admired for a long time, and I'm so happy you're here. Dr. Beeman is an OBGYN by training, and she built upon her years at the bedside by taking on progressive executive leadership roles and has more than 15 years of experience in matrixed multi-hospital systems. Currently, she is the Chief Medical Officer of HCA Health One, Presbyterian St. Luke's, and Rocky Mountain Children's Hospital in Denver, Colorado. Prior to that, she was the inaugural Chief Quality Officer at El Camino Health in the Mountain View, California area, and the Chief Surgical Officer at Palo Alto Foundation Medical Group in Palo Alto, California, which is how we met. Dr. Beeman got her MD from the University of Vermont College of Medicine, did her residency at the University of Michigan School of Medicine, and taught as a clinical assistant professor of OBGYN at NYU School of Medicine. She also earned her MBA from the University of Massachusetts Eisenberg School of Management in 2019. So Dr. Beeman is known as a curious, humble, and energetic leader. She believes strongly in understanding and connecting meaningfully with stakeholders, customers, colleagues, and even those she disagrees with. She uses authenticity and often humor to build trust and confidence with her frontline teams, and she's built a reputation as a leader who supports a culture of quality, clinical excellence, and inclusion. So, Holly, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm so excited to get to connect with you again.
Oh, thank you. So, you have had a very impressive journey from bedside clinician to executive leader, and I'm sure you have learned a lot along the way in terms of what works, how you lead, what doesn't work. So, when you reflect on your early leadership days, how would you describe your default leadership style when you first stepped into leadership? What do you think?
You know, I think that I was probably a very, very typical physician leader. And I would say I was surgical to a default. So I would see a problem, I would make a snap assessment, and I would be like, this part of this is not good or like cancerous, and I'm going to cut it out. That was my approach. And that's how clinically I was successful, was being able to like make a quick diagnosis, identify the problem, have an intervention where it was like adding a medication or removing something, and then everybody was happy and that was a success. So that was my approach. And I will say, which I'm sure you're going to ask me about, it did not work well. It was not effective.
Yeah. I mean, we wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of moving from being a fixer, being a problem solver, parachuting in, fixing the problem and parachuting back out again, to being more of a facilitator, right? So what did being a fixer in that mode, when you first started this, what did that look like for you in action?
I can give you a really specific example. And I was pretty new in my role, and the chair of orthopedics came to me and said, Holly, and I'll make up the name of the doctor, like, Bob's really not performing well. He's not doing his cases. He's got infections. He's not getting along with the team. And I was like, okay, I'm on it. Got it. Roger that. I go talk to Bob, the doctor, sit down with him in his office. I probably didn't even have the decency to schedule it. I probably just bombed in the middle of his clinic and just gave him feedback. And he was really caught off guard. He was blown away. And then like fast forward 2 or 3 weeks later, and it turns out the chair of the department wasn't an effective leader. And he had actually a personal vendetta against this Bob guy. And so for him, he probably is like, oh, here's a new leader. She wants to prove herself. I'm going to give her a problem and she's going to fix this for me. Bob, the doctor, really didn't have any issues. The chair of orthopedics had issues and had an agenda. And I jumped right in to be the fixer because I thought this is number one, my role. And also, I want to be liked. And I want the chair of orthopedics to be like, oh, Holly's my girl. She's going to fix my problems. So that's like a classic example. And I did that in many, many settings, unfortunately, in the first 6 or 9 months.
And what was the impact? I mean, in that story in particular, what happened as a result of that?
Well, I harmed Dr. Bob. Like, think about it. Like, you have a new leader that just interrupts you in the middle of your clinical day and gives you feedback that's completely inaccurate. So I harmed him. I never repaired that relationship ever. Um, and also, if you think about, I was just kind of an agent for this chair. So I think I also didn't demonstrate to the chair that I actually had effective leadership because I was just solving a problem of his. So yeah, it was unsuccessful on all fronts.
Wow, boy, that's a painful way to learn that kind of lesson. Sometimes people think about in their developmental journey as leaders, there's often somewhat of a turning point. And I don't know if it's that story that you were just sharing or if there were others, but was there something that really made you realize that that kind of fixer, problem solver, just get in there, wasn't always effective or sustainable?
Well, I will say this, and I'm really not at all intentionally trying to promote you, but what I will say is, as physicians, we are not trained to do this. And if we rely on the instincts that got us to want to go into medical school and the training we got on the floor, we will fail. And so my entire career, I have a coach now. I've been doing this now 20 years. I have leaned on coaches. And I had the benefit when I was at Sutter, honestly, working with you, where I had coaching and I had one-on-one coaching. And I also really embraced when like a group of new leaders would have coaching. And it will seem like some of the activities seem so basic, but I could not do it on my own. There's no way I would have had the insight because I was in my DNA trained since I was however old to be a fixer. So I really had to learn and trust and be vulnerable and share these fails. And I'll pivot for a second and say that part of my leadership style when I was managing as the chief surgical officer and I was managing maybe 12 physician executives, I would start my meetings. Many times in healthcare, we start the meetings with a connect to purpose or patient safety or a good catch. And I would start my meetings with a leadership fail. I was like, I want you to tell me about something that didn't go well. And we're all going to work on it together because I wanted us all to get comfortable being vulnerable and talking about how we got it wrong because that engenders humility. And I think it's hard as a leader to have humility because we're so used to being recognized for knowing the answers.
Yes. Tell me more about that. That's so fascinating to me. And I absolutely agree. Tell me more about that and why that's so difficult often for physicians, especially in leadership. Why is that so difficult?
I think I'm a good clinician to answer that because as an OBGYN, I was in the clinic seeing patients more like a primary care doctor where it's much about relationship building. I was on labor and delivery in a delivery room where you've got to be like a dictator almost when things are going south. And in the operating room, you have to really be the captain of the entire room.
Yeah.
And so in my DNA is being in charge,
Right.
and being calm. And even when I don't know the answers, is to fake it so that people feel confident. And when you're a leader, in my experience, that has to get flipped completely on its head.
Right.
And acknowledging that you might not know the answers is like an art form that I've worked on very intentionally, honestly, with my coaches over the years. I got comfortable saying, I don't know the answer.
To recognize when you don't know the answer, to be okay being open about that, being confident that you will find the answer and you have confidence in the group to find the answer, but really recognizing that it's okay to say, I don't know right now. I think is
Right.
a huge shift. We talk a lot about the different hats of the roles that physician leaders, clinician leaders have to play, and shifting from that clinician hat and the expert in the OR and the director to being a leader. You have to just entirely shift gears. It's such an interesting premise, and it's challenging, right? I think it's
Yeah.
really challenging. So, versus being a fixer, what does being a facilitator mean to you in your leadership role in this context?
I would say I'll give you a very specific example, and I'm going to add another one of the pearls I think is core to my ability to be effective, which as a facilitator, it's the ability to sincerely apologize when you get it wrong. So I had an experience in my new hospital when I first arrived here where there was a bad patient outcome and it was in the operating room. And so we had to rapidly turn around the way we do our surgical consents. And I was 2 weeks into my new role. And not only do we have to change the way we do our consents, we had to actually make sure that PAs were validating that the op note the surgeon dictated was accurate, as opposed to was the PA doing the case? Was the surgeon doing the case? So I worked with the team and rolled this out. I felt a sense of urgency. My boss was holding me accountable. I had a department meeting in air quotes with the Department of Pediatric Surgeons, talked about this, of which half of the people were in attendance, rolled it out, and it was a disaster because the key surgeons, high volume surgeons, didn't know about it. This was a huge impact on their workflow, and they were highly suspicious that hospital employees were reading their op notes to validate their accuracy. So again, even though I've been doing this for 20 years now, I was really in fixer mode and I felt like I had communicated.
Right.
I had sent a memo, I'd sent a letter, I'd done this. My mistake was I didn't take 2 minutes to ask the chief operating officer who are the 5 busiest surgeons in our pediatric OR? And let me make sure I just go to their office and take 2 minutes of their time to say, here's our problem. This is why we're doing this.
Yeah.
And can you support me on this really disruptive change? So I didn't do that. And then I kept getting called to the operating room by the charge nurses being like, Holly, we've got a mutiny. You've got to come up here. We got a mutiny. And the surgeons were livid. And so then there was another department meeting 2 weeks later, and I said, I'm new here and that is no excuse, but I got it wrong. And I am so sorry. This is on me. I am accountable for these changes. And I got it wrong. I didn't talk to you. I didn't warn you. I didn't even speak with the anesthesiologists who are also impacted. And so when you are frustrated with this, please don't yell at the nurses. This is me. I own it. This was my decision. I'm enforcing it. And my communication, I would give it a D minus, and I'm going to do better. And so the thing for the surgeons and any doctor really, they really value accountability. When you say this was my decision, it really wasn't my decision. It was the government's decision. And so to me, that's being a facilitator because they're taking it out on the nurses. I've got my boss being really animated about this. And so I'm that person in the middle.
Right.
And I have to make sure that I'm satisfying the anxieties, the needs, and the demands of all parties. And I had forsaken the people at the bedside who are doing the surgery. I didn't talk to them and show them respect by letting them know. So I continue to learn. It's really cool. I continue to learn.
Yeah, I think that this is an evolution and a lifelong process, honestly. Nobody gets this right in the beginning and,
Yeah.
and continue to learn from the challenges and the errors that we make. And I think that catching yourself after the fact, recognizing when you didn't do it as well as you could have is just as important and learning
Yeah.
from that and
Right.
being kind to yourself in that process, I think is so, so important. So
Yeah.
it seems like it's been a combination of things for you in terms of how you start developing these skills and this awareness. It's awareness, and then it's trying to implement some of these skills that you're learning as you go. It sounds like the coaching work help you be more mindful, but then really just learning by things
Yes.
that happen in the field, right?
I remember, and you know Dave Quincy well.
Mhm.
He was one of my first bosses when I was in a lower level physician leadership job. And I remember after one of the fails I had, going to him and saying, Dave, I wish somehow I could become an effective leader without having to make all these goddamn mistakes.
Like,
Yeah, you and me both, but it's
yeah,
just like anything.
right.
Um, the most powerful lesson sometimes is getting it wrong,
Yeah.
but also I think important for people listening to this podcast is to give yourself grace.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
because you're not going to get it right. And that's why as a leader, I encourage you to have leadership fail rounds with your teams
Uh-huh.
to acknowledge that these are skills that are not inherent, they're honed and
Right.
crafted over time. And you have to have some small misses and some catastrophic misses
Yeah.
to really learn and improve. So I would say learning to give myself grace has been really helpful.
Yeah. I love what you were saying about the failure aspect because what it really makes me think about Amy Edmondson, who does all the work on
Oh
psychological
yeah.
safety,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
One of her big things is about destigmatizing failure. And if you really think about the cycle that we're so typically in, it's like we've got to get away from failure and we hide it and we don't learn from it. And the goal is to avoid failure, which is never going to happen. We are never going to be able to avoid failure. And I love her premise about learning quicker from failure and creating an environment where people can say, I made a mistake. What do we do with this? And then
Right.
faster and recover faster. And I think that's just, I think that is truly an important part of being a facilitator in this leadership role as well.
Right.
Helping
I
that
agree.
environment, don't you think? Yeah.
I do think so. And also that's what inherently creates psychological safety.
Okay.
I did recently give a talk about shame, a 15-minute talk about shame. And it was about having the courage to talk about things that didn't go well when all you really wanted to do was go under the bed or crawl in the corner.
Right.
Particularly, I think, as women executives in healthcare,
Mhm.
we carry a burden. I won't go into like that's a whole nother podcast. But there's a burden of like, how were you as a mother or as a wife or as a caregiver of your elder parents? And so when we're executive women, we fail a lot in some of those spaces outside of our executive roles. And then when there's a, for me personally, when there was a failure in an executive role, it just kind of piled on. And so I worked very deliberately to get comfortable talking about my failures and what I learned from them.
Mhm.
And that's been really cathartic, really, really important.
Doesn't that help you extricate yourself from that well of shame just by, right? By processing it, by thinking about it,
Absolutely.
by seeing it with a
Absolutely.
little bit of distance. Yeah.
You know, when you, and this is like Brene Brown quote,
Yeah.
kind of, I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but when you name it, it has less power over you.
Yeah.
Which is hard to embrace. And like as a physician leader, oh my gosh, we are trained from the outset. That is the wrong direction to go. Um, but naming it and acknowledging it. So for instance, as a clinician, if you're, you know, you're a neurologist, you're seeing a patient and you miss the diagnosis and you get it wrong.
Yeah.
Then you're kind of scrambling, like, what do I do? And there's an art form to that, but it is freeing of the torture to acknowledge, like, wow, I didn't get that right. I
Right.
just didn't get that right. And I want to do better next time.
Right. Right. Yeah. That's a powerful idea to bring into your leadership. I think that's
Yeah.
another area where people feel like as a leader, they have to know everything. They have to have all the answers. They can't show any crack in the armor or somehow they're going to lack credibility.
Yeah.
Right. And I always think that showing some vulnerability can actually build your credibility more than break it down. People have a hard time understanding that at first.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think also, you know, as you and I and other people that are listening to this think about the leaders they've admired along the way,
Mhm.
I didn't gravitate towards people that were, you know, the prima donna, I got it all covered, don't ask any questions. I'll tell you, I remember there was a woman I hadn't interacted with. She was a hospital CEO, total badass by anybody's definition. One of the hospitals she worked at, they got the Baldrige Award.
Wow.
And I was at a meeting with her and some doctors, and a patient had, I can't remember if they died or had a really bad outcome on her watch in her hospital. And we sat down with the doctors who were ready to lynch her because there was a systems failure that resulted in this. And we sat down at this table with all these very pumped up alpha surgeons ready to lynch her. And I'll get choked up talking about it. And she said, "This is on me." And I am so, and she cried and not like bawling, but she had a tear. And she said, "I am so sorry. This is me. This is on me. This is my responsibility." Um, and then the room was diffused. And this is this woman who we see her walking down the hallway. You'd like run and be like, this is this powerful woman. She's conquered EBITDA margins and capital budgets and built this and built that. And
Right.
she just owned it.
What happened in that moment that diffused those surgeons that were ready to take her on? Well, what do you think changed for them?
She was accountable. She didn't blame it on anybody else.
Right.
And that's the magic. So when all these people are mad, and this is something I've taken from her, is I had to go into an OR the other day because a neurosurgeon was doing a case and he needed to add something onto the case, but he wasn't privileged for it. It was on his privilege form. So I had to go into this guy and be like, "I'm so sorry, Dr. Jones, you're not privileged to do this." Because 2 or 3 nurses had gone in there and like they left excoriated and in tears.
Oh, dear.
And so I walked in there and I said, "Dr. Jones, we've met before. I'm Holly Beeman. I'm the CMO. This is my decision, and I want you to take it out on me because you're not doing this case."
Right.
He let me have it. I said, "I am really sorry, but this is not going to happen. And this is my decision. These nurses have nothing to do with it." So that's what this woman, Janet Wagner, had done, is she didn't blame it like, "Oh, well, we had," this is the common thing, is like, "Oh, well, they were locums or they were trainees or there was this or we didn't have funding." She said, "My responsibility. This patient was harmed because of me and my leadership and the way I didn't do it right." And it just diffused because she owned it and they didn't have to keep looking for somebody to blame. She gave them the target
Right. And
right there.
yeah. And with that example with the OR, the surgeon, I mean, you obviously created safety for those nurses too. You demonstrated that this is with me and you can take it out on me, and you created a boundary for that doctor, for that person. I think that that's such an incredible gift to give those other people, to give them,
Yes.
and him as well, to be honest, to create
Yes.
a certain boundary for him to be able to put his own whatever anger,
Right.
whatever he has going on. I think that that's just huge, Holly. So what else do you do to try to create safe spaces for people as a leader so that they feel safe, not only, physically in an example like that, but contributing ideas and showing up as themselves,
Yeah.
right?
Yes. I'm very, very deliberate. And it's all goes back to Amy Edmondson of creating psychological safety. You can get nothing done. And so I read all of her books. And I will say, because this is a podcast, it's on a video, but you'll see that my badge reel is a rainbow badge reel. And I have men and women on my team who don't fit into one box. And so they don't have these in my hospital. And I ordered them on Amazon, and I have a bucket of them on my desk because I have to be an ally, right? If I'm not willing to put my neck out there and be an ally of whatever it is, somebody, whether it's race or religion or gender, or having a completely different opinion than what the party line is, I think it's important to be a visible ally. I'll give you another example. This is like very detailed, but in one of my last hospitals in California, it was very Christian centric, and people don't even realize you're in a Christian centric world if you're Christian. But when I first started there, every holiday and every leadership event, everything was related around Christmas and Easter. And as you know, Easter falls with Passover, Ramadan, and many other holidays that are really important to many humans on our planet. So one of the women on my team celebrates Ramadan, is like an incredibly talented woman from Syria. She's visibly Muslim because she covers her head. And I had a leadership retreat over Ramadan, and we went offsite, and my EA at the time is like a complete foodie, and we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner and snacks and everything else. And we kept telling people, come with an empty stomach. And it was during Ramadan. And so before I left home that morning, I filled up one of my canvas bags with all this Tupperware. And when I got there, I found this woman and I pulled her aside. I was like, I am so sorry we're doing this during Ramadan. And I want to make sure you can enjoy every single morsel after sunset. So please take all this home with you, enjoy it with your family. And she started bawling.
Wow. Yeah.
And this woman is so loyal to me
Yeah.
and will do anything for me because I saw her and I showed her respect. And that's how, as for me, as an effective leader, you can engender loyalty and advocacy to advance things that are important to me is by seeing them,
Right.
valuing your people, and showing them respect, no matter what.
So tell me something. 100% agree. I think that's such a beautiful story. I actually really love that Tupperware. I really do. That's really, really heartfelt and very moving, to be honest, and not something I think most people would think of doing. So I just think that's really powerful.
Well, let me just interject with a caveat because not everybody would necessarily think this, but I think one of the reasons it came to mind is for me growing up, I lived in Muslim countries. So I lived in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan for 8 years. And so I wouldn't expect everybody to be hyper aware of Muslim holidays, but I am.
Right.
So I don't want to set the bar like you have to recognize this, that, the other to be a good leader. But if you do recognize it, listen to your instinct and act on it.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So tell me more about the making space for people of different opinions, because I think that's one of the hardest things for some leaders that I've worked with in the past to develop the skill of being able to keep their own ideas and solutions necessarily to themselves at first, maybe just not leading with that, but allowing space for people to come to the table with what they think and to acknowledge that and do something with that. So tell me what you do with that.
Well, I will say it's an ongoing area of deep, concentrated focus because it does not come naturally to me. And there's another great book that you probably actually recommended to me called Humble Inquiry. I'm blanking on the name of the author.
Yes.
So the simple thing is to talk less. Talk less.
And it's hard for people to be comfortable with a little bit of silence. I think often if teams are used to you being the one driving every meeting, that they're not accustomed to seeing you just sort of stand up and maybe kick it off and then let it go over to them. And they might stumble at first thinking, where does this person want me to go with this? But I think it can be so powerful to just bite your tongue and see what happens.
It is. And then the other thing too, I'd say 2 follow-ups on that is being quiet. I'm in an organization where the hierarchy is really quite vertical and very, very, very rigid. As people on my team are like 3 rungs below me on a totem pole, and I will be really quiet. I will have them lead it. And you can see just what you're talking about, Ashley, is like there's no movement. Then they get a little loud. And then I give them a look like, oh my God, that's really, and then they get a little louder.
Yeah.
And so giving positive reinforcement, like with nonverbal and verbal cues, I think is key. You can't let them hang out there to dry.
Right.
And then another important thing, there's somebody on my team who's just amazing. He's got so much potential. He works for me. His presentation skills are not great. And I want him to be successful. And so just yesterday, he and I were meeting and I was like, Sean, he was trying to convince a group of executives that we should try to go for the Baldrige Award, what I mentioned earlier.
Right.
And when he met with the group of executives, he was like, and this is the process, and this is what the cost is, and this is what we'd have to do. And so, I said afterwards, like, what's the why? And so I got Simon Sinek's book for him. And I was like, well, if you want to cheat, you can look at the TED Talk, but you have to start with why. So also taking the opportunity to give feedback when you're authentically trying to help people improve.
Right.
He was so grateful because I wasn't like, oh God, that sucks. What are you doing? I was like, hey, I love your idea, but nobody else in the room really got it. So that's important as a leader when you're leading team members is to take the time to give difficult feedback to help them grow.
Absolutely. Coach them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, fixing to facilitating is all about learning how to be a better coach, right?
Yeah.
I think people are wells of knowledge and wisdom in their own right. And we just have to create a space where people can show you that. And part of that is
Yes.
biting our tongue, and part of that is asking really great questions to help draw that out a little bit. I think what's always not a pushback, but a hard thing, a challenge that leaders bring up is the time issue. What's your thought on that? Because that's always the big crunch. When you're
You
stressed and
know,
rushed, what do you do?
I don't know. Like I'm a people person. So I think I'm coming in with a bias, but to me, healthcare is about relationships. We are in the business of human relationships.
Great.
We are not in the business. Well, I am not in the business of EBITDA and capital. That would be great if it's an outcome of my relationships. To me, the relationships, nothing else matters than, my example of going into the OR to address that really angry physician because those nurses have my back now. And anytime there's a problem in the OR and they're worried about it, that's going to affect patient safety. And that is my accountability. They're going to call me
Right.
and say, "Oh, we're really worried because we didn't like our sponge count. Our sponge count is off." So I went up to that OR. It wasn't in my job description. It was going to be awful and uncomfortable and awkward, but I did it to cultivate trust and relationships. So I left a meeting. I canceled it. When all else failed, if somebody gives you the opportunity to have a meaningful interaction with a human, you drop everything and you have it
Yeah.
because they don't come by that often.
No, you're absolutely right. It just makes me think about one of my last guests was Dr. Apurv Gupta, who does work around the loving organization.
Mm,
And his whole premise is that if we create structures, and it is about relationships, but if we create structures of compassion and relational development, that those are the things that are going to support the financial bottom line that we're trying to get to. There's no other way that we can
exactly.
get to that effectively, sustainably, without focusing on the relational piece of it. And
I
agree.
totally
Yeah.
agree. And one of the
Yeah.
things that's been interesting, and I'm not at all doing a pitch for my current organization, but my current organization is a for-profit health system. So I had reservations. I'd always been in the nonprofit space.
Right.
And I have seen so much generosity and kindness in my for-profit system. So, for example, the hospital I'm working in, we have a very large blood cancer program, and there's a new medication that's available to treat a complication of a stem cell transplant called graft versus host disease. The medication is going to be $200,000 per patient.
Wow.
Um, and so I pitched it to the head of finance and I got it approved.
Okay.
And I said, this isn't about a medication. This is about humans. And I have never in this for-profit health system had anything not approved. And these are like expensive therapies where there is no margin.
Wow.
It's just a huge loss, but it's because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
So I'm in an organization which has a great we do really well. We make a really healthy margin, but we do the right thing. And it's to your point of your previous guest is we are here to alleviate human suffering
Right.
and improve human life. That's why I love my job right now because I'm in an environment where we are all aligned. We're painfully diligent about FTEs and expenses and other things. But at the end of the day, when we have to make a decision about a human life and how we're going to help that human, we make the right decision.
Right. That's powerful. I think when you find the organization that fits your values,
Right.
and you feel like yourself within that system, I think that's such a plus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also sounds like to me that you're one of the reasons why, if you're demonstrating these kinds of behaviors that we've been talking about, it creates this wonderful ripple effect. And I've seen that across a lot of different cultures where leaders start to take these things on, start becoming better listeners and approaching things with transparency and all the things that we've been talking about. What have you seen as the ripple effects for you in your teams and your cultures that you've been within?
We're happy people. The gentleman I was talking about earlier, I was giving him coaching feedback. He has 2 young kids and his wife has a new job and he's having some childcare problems. I'm like, Sean, your children are only going to be 3 and 5 once. So you have to see the whole human and you have to support them to be a whole human
Right.
and role model it. Like I don't check emails on the weekend. I do not check emails after 5. You also have to role model it. You can't be shooting off an email on a Saturday night
Right.
and that be the role models. So, and I learned that from you, Ashley, when we did our leadership work with you. I mean, that was a big, big part of it. And a lot of times in the work you did, you brought in leaders to say, what did you learn? What worked well and what didn't? And what I heard from so many leaders, whether they were men or women, is that they missed the childhood of their children and they had regrets.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to do that to my people. I want my people to be in their 50s, 60s, 70s, wherever they are in their career and feel like I was a good dad. I was a good partner. I was a good daughter to my ailing patients. I'm probably getting way too weepy and emotional here, but
No, but it's true. It's true, Holly. And I think that we help people just be better humans, live better lives. And I think obviously there's impacts on all of the metrics that we want to talk about, right? Outcomes,
yes.
satisfaction,
Yes.
turnover, all those things. Have you seen examples of that in your
Oh, yes.
work?
I mean, not to be old Miss Braggy, but my engagement scores when I was the chief surgical officer at Palo Alto Medical Foundation over the course of 5 years, the physician engagement went from 30% to 70%.
Wow. Yeah.
And when I was in my role as the chief quality officer, we went from like a CMS 3-star to a CMS 5-star.
Wow.
So the outcomes are tangible. They are tangible. So I talk a lot about the human element, but it's like Dr. Gupta, I think was your previous guest, was saying, it's the human element which animates the objective metrics and outcomes, and they go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other.
That's absolutely right. That's why we do this work, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is why we do this work. Well, let me ask you this. For anyone listening who really wants to start doing this better or doing this well or take this on, what kind of skills or mindsets do you think that they should start thinking about or trying to implement for themselves? What do you think?
I think something you mentioned earlier in our conversation, which is be curious.
Yeah.
That's it. Just be curious.
Yeah. Why?
So, I was saying how like when you're a physician, we're trained to find snap answers, but we're also curious.
Right.
So don't think you don't have to know the answers. Show that you don't know the answers. Be curious. Be curious about, I think, before we started recording, I was talking about an interaction I had with a boss at one point in time where he was really mad at me for something I had done.
Right.
And I'm seasoned enough now that I reacted to his anger by being curious. I'm like, oh my God, I triggered him. What is it that I did? And I didn't get defensive.
Right.
I just was like, wow, why is he so mad at me?
Right.
That comes from being seasoned, as you and I've talked about. Unfortunately, you have to go through it many times.
Yeah.
So I was curious about his anger and I was curious about his frustration with me. And I was grateful for his transparency and letting me know that something I had done was not at all aligned with his expectations of me.
Right.
So that's an example of how I've grown. Is like maybe 15 years ago, if I'd had that interaction, I probably would have started bawling. And then started brushing up my resume thinking I need another job.
Or getting defensive. I mean, that's where people often go too.
It's like, she's wrong and that's wrong. And I might have gone to my office and written up the counter argument. So being humble and curious and always being curious, like learning. It's so cool.
Yeah, it is. I love that too, because there's a curiosity that you naturally have, but then there's the curiosity when things are hard. That's the harder one to build. I had this wonderful psychologist I knew that he said our go-to premise, most of us, is if something's going on, we're like, it's all about me and it ain't good, right?
I know.
Yeah.
No, isn't that wild?
It is.
It's such a design flaw. It is such a design flaw.
So having the moment to pause and take some distance from that, that's something we learn over time, and it's not easy.
Right. Yeah. Not at all.
I love that, though. All right. So here's how I want to close. I'm going to ask you, and I haven't shared these with you yet, so I'm just going to ask you some pulse questions, and I don't want you to overthink them, but just give me your answers to these 10 questions, okay?
Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
All right. What's one word to describe your leadership style?
Brave.
Brave. What's a leadership value that you won't compromise on?
Integrity.
Yeah. What's the most important habit that you've built as a leader?
Self-care.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. What's one thing that you use to help you reset after a tough day?
My dogs and going for a walk.
Lovely. That's great. They're great helpers, aren't they?
Yes.
What's something that you used to believe about leadership that you no longer do?
Having the answers.
Yeah. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned from your team or a team that you've worked with?
To get out of their way and let them shine.
Beautiful. So what is your favorite question to ask in a one-on-one?
What can I be doing differently to help you?
Perfect. Yeah. What is a book or a resource that every physician leader should know about?
Oh, well, okay. You have to read all the Amy Edmondson books. You have to read Simon Sinek's TED Talk, and you have to read Edgar Schein's Humble Inquiry. Sorry, that wasn't one.
No, that's fine.
That was a bunch.
What is a leadership superpower that you admire in other people?
This is contrary to what we've been talking about, but my current boss, I really, really admire. He's not a clinician. He's the CEO of my hospital, and he knows the details about clinical things really, really well. He cares. He shows up to department meetings. He goes into the OR, and he really wants to speak the language and understand the passions and priorities of the people he's leading. And I love that. So he knows a lot. He knows so much because he cares.
Because he cares. He demonstrates that. All right, last one. What is one thing every physician leader should try this week?
Express gratitude to somebody on your team.
Oh, fantastic. And why that?
Even go to somebody on your team who you think's not really a strong performer and think about something they did well and be like, I really like the way you managed that meeting. That was difficult and you did a really good job. Because that person probably doesn't feel seen or valued because you probably with your body language are not really giving them good vibes because you think they're not that great of a performer, but you do that and you'll see the next day they're going to show up in a very different way.
Yeah, I love that. Holly, well, I really appreciate this conversation. It's been a lot of fun to talk with you. And
Yes.
your openness and your candor and how you share things and your authenticity, I think it's just what makes you shine, honestly, as a leader.
Well, I have to say, Ashley, you've been a coach to me since my very first days as a leader, and I'll get choked up, but you have meant so much to me. You've been so approachable. You saw me. You did. You saw me. You saw what I brought. You saw what I needed to work on. You saw where I was rough. And you had the kindness and courage to support me. And so you are really a part of my success. And for that, I'm so grateful.
Oh, Holly, thank you so much for saying that. That means a lot to me. I appreciate you. I hope you come back again. I think we have more to talk about.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you so much. It was really awesome. I enjoyed this time.
Take care, Holly. Thank you. For all of you listening, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life to be with us. I hope this conversation gave you something to reflect on in your own leadership journey. And as you take these ideas back into your work, remember, growth takes time and none of us get it right the first time. So be kind to yourselves. You're learning, you're leading, and that matters. So take good care, and I'll see you next time. Lead Well MD is produced by Ashley Wendell and Physician Leader Group. Get new episodes as soon as they're published by following Lead Well MD on your favorite podcast app. And don't forget to share with your colleagues and spread the word.